It was just another scorching afternoon in the Arizona desert. At Sandridge Training Base, a group of fresh recruits gathered near the firing range. The air was thick with testosterone and desert heat, and the mood was light. Some soldiers were playfully arguing about who could hit the most targets. Others were adjusting their rifles, sipping water, and talking trash like only young men in uniform could. That was when she appeared. A small figure in a faded windbreaker, grey hair tucked under a plain cap, walked quietly across the gravel lot. She wasn't fast, she wasn't tall, she didn't carry herself like someone with authority. No one saluted. No one stood at attention. They didn't even notice her at first. Then someone laughed. "Hey, who let Grandma onto the range?" The laughter snowballed. One of the younger recruits, Carter, nudged his buddy. "You see that thing she's carrying? Looks like a museum piece." And it did. The woman was cradling what appeared to be an old M14 rifle, paint-chipped, scopeless, held together by what looked like duct tape and old cloth. She moved slowly, but with intention, placing the rifle down on a bench at the far end of the firing line. A supervising officer walked over, confused. "Ma'am, this is a restricted military facility. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." She looked up at him calmly. Her voice was quiet, but clear. "I won't be long. Just want to fire one round. It's been a while." The recruits burst into chuckles again. "Fire one round?" Carter jeered. "At what? Her own foot?" Another soldier, Jenkins, decided to take it a step further. He picked up an AR-15 from the armory rack nearby, made sure the safety was still engaged, and walked over to her with a smirk. "Here you go, Grandma. Want something a little more modern?" She didn't take it. Instead, she glanced at the weapon, then back at the M14, and calmly replied, "This one's just fine." Her words didn't carry force. They didn't need to. She went back to checking her rifle, as if the taunts weren't even happening, but her silence irritated them more than if she'd snapped back. "She probably learned to shoot in a bingo hall," someone whispered. Another added, "She'll dislocate her shoulder if she actually pulls the trigger." No one stopped them. Then Jenkins did something meaner. He waved to the rest of the group and said, "Let's give her a real challenge." He walked to the range and moved the metal targets not in a straight line, but staggered, angled, spaced to make even trained marksmen struggle. One target at 300 meters, another at a diagonal behind a barrier, and the third half concealed behind sandbags. It was an unfair setup, even for elite shooters. Then he turned back and said, "All right, ma'am. Let's see what you've got." She didn't respond. She didn't flinch. She adjusted the rifle old iron sights, no tech assist. Her left hand steadied the barrel, her right hand rested gently on the trigger. The group continued talking. "Let's give her some encouragement," Carter snorted. "Hey, if you actually hit something, I'll clean everyone's rifles for a week." Another chimed in, "Now make it a month." The woman, still nameless to them, took one step forward and looked downrange. Everything went quiet. Not because they were waiting, but because something in her changed. Her posture shifted not stiff, but grounded. Her breathing slowed, her fingers wrapped around the rifle like it was an old friend. The way she exhaled felt practiced. It wasn't the way a hobbyist held a weapon. It was the way someone holds memory. Then she pulled the trigger. Crack. The shot rang through the range like lightning through dry air. Everyone looked up, expecting to see the dust kick off a single target. Instead, clang. The first target rang out dead center. Then clanged the second, and before anyone could process what they'd seen, clang. 3 targets, 3 hits, 1 bullet. It had ricocheted off the first, into the second, then arced into the third, a technique so rare it was spoken about more in myth than manuals. Dead silence. No one laughed. The supervising officer stood frozen. Carter's jaw actually dropped. Jenkins muttered something under his breath and looked down at his boots. A few feet away, one recruit glasses, quiet, always reading manuals, whispered to himself, "That's not possible." Then louder, "Sir, that's Ghost Recon." The words hit the air like a thunderclap. Everyone turned. Ghost? What? The recruit's name was Lewisheld, up his tablet, pulling up an old tactical guide from a sniper course. Ricochet triple hit. It's theoretical. It's from Ghost Recon training techniques. The older officer walked toward the woman, who was now calmly packing up her rifle. "Ma'am," he said, "who are you?" She looked at him, then the stunned recruit. "I'm just someone who remembers how to aim." She nodded once, then turned and walked off the range, boots crunching on the gravel. No ceremony, no salute, no need to prove anything else. And still, no one knew her name. But suddenly, they all wanted to. Louis couldn't stop shaking. He wasn't sure what made his heart race faster, the impossible shot he'd just witnessed, or the realization slowly forming in his head. He was the kind of recruit who read too much. Technical manuals, field reports, declassified strategies from long-forgotten wars. He remembered coming across a blurry, black-and-white training photo once. A woman with piercing eyes, standing beside an M14, just like that one. The caption had been half erased, but he remembered the name scribbled in the margin. Ghost Recon 017. It couldn't be. That was a legend. A myth instructors shared during night drills when they wanted to scare the cocky ones straight. But what if it wasn't? That night, after lights out, Louis snuck into the training archive room. It was technically off limits for his clearance level, but curiosity has always been more persuasive than rules. He dug through old sniper field logs, performance tapes, mission debriefs. Most were routine. Until he found one labeled Operation Phoenix, 2005. It had multiple redactions, entire paragraphs blacked out, but something stuck out. A page detailing an advanced ballistic test in live combat. Ricochet engagement executed successfully under enemy fire. 3 confirmed HVTs neutralized with a single shot. Sniper identified. Lieutenant Colonel E. Shaw, Ghost Recon Unit 017. Mission success. Team extracted under heavy fire. Commander's status unknown. Louis leaned back in his chair. E. Shaw. Evelyn Shaw? He pulled up the security feed from earlier that day. Thermal imaging showed everything, no electronic scopes, no smart tech, just breath control, iron sights, and mathematics. She hadn't guessed that shot. She had calculated it. Louis ran straight to his platoon leader the next morning. "Sir, that woman Evelyn Shaw thinks she's Ghost Recon." The lieutenant blinked. "Kid, Ghost Recon isn't a person. It's just a nickname. You're talking about a legend, not a real person." "No, sir. She's real. I've seen the ballistics, the footage, the archived missions." The officer rolled his eyes. "And I've heard stories about aliens in Fort Bragg. Let it go." But Louis couldn't. He stayed up for 2 nights digging deeper. He uncovered a restricted medical recorder ghost of a file. Patient, Lieutenant Colonel Evelyn Shaw. Condition, refuses public recognition, exhibits signs of severe trauma, requests total anonymity, declined all military honors. And suddenly, it all made sense. She didn't want applause. She wasn't there to impress. She came back to remember who she was. And, maybe, to see if anyone else still remembered too. The next morning, Evelyn returned to the range. No one called her Grandma this time. She walked the same slow, steady path, rifle wrapped in the same worn cloth, jacket zipped up to the neck. This time, the commanding officer himself came out to meet her. "Ma'am," he said, standing a little taller now, "would you be willing to demonstrate that shot again?" Evelyn gave a faint smile. "That kind of shot's not about muscle, it's about remembering." A crowd gathered over, 100 soldiers, officers, and instructors. Whispered rumors had moved faster than official memos. Everyone wanted to see if the impossible could be repeated. The challenge was set. 3 moving targets, each changing position every 5 seconds. Ricocheting off metal was one thing, but off moving targets? She stepped up, still without fanfare, still without a word. This time, they noticed her breathing calm and deep. This time, they saw how she tilted her ear slightly toward the wind. This time, they didn't laugh. She squeezed the trigger. Crack. 3 targets, hit in less than a second. Not one missed. Silence. Then someone, almost reverently, whispered, "Only Ghost Recon knew that trick." She turned slowly, rolling up her sleeve just far enough to reveal a faded patch silver and black. Ghost Recon 017. A murmur moved through the crowd. A name once passed down in rumor now stood in flesh and blood. From the back of the formation, an older man stepped forward, balding, stiff-legged, his uniform crisp despite retirement. A general. He stared at her for a moment, voice trembling. "Lieutenant Colonel Evelyn Shaw. I was the one who signed your discharge papers 20 years ago. She met his eyes without bitterness. "I know." He saluted her hands shaking, eyes red. "I'm sorry. We buried your name to protect the mission, but we forgot the cost." Evelyn returned the salute, not as a symbol of authority, but of closure. "The cost was mine to carry," she said, "and I carried it quietly because I chose to." Someone in the crowd spoke up, a young woman this time. "Ma'am, if you were erased from the records, why come back now?" Evelyn glanced at the recruits around her. Their faces were so young. She saw herself in them not as she was now, but as she once had been. "Because I heard laughter," she said softly, "at something that didn't deserve to be mocked. And I remembered being young before I learned that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one keeping everyone else alive." Not one word was said after that. They just watched her pack up the M14 once more, hands precise, respectful, as if the rifle were a relic from a forgotten war. And in a way, it was. Evelyn didn't return the next day, or the day after that. But her presence lingered like smoke after gunfire. Soldiers started whispering her name in the mess hall. Recruits watched old range footage frame by frame. Instructors pulled ancient ballistics diagrams out of storage, tracing the impossible path of her bullet like it was sacred scripture. Even the skeptics grew quiet. Because what they'd seen wasn't just impressive, was unimaginable. And now they couldn't unsee it. Louis, restless as ever, couldn't let it go. He was up late again, digging through digital archives and base security footage. Not just Sandridge, she went deeper. He cross-referenced records from Afghanistan, from classified Black Ops programs he technically had no clearance to view. But, he'd learned by now, real legends don't exist on paper. They exist in gaps in redacted files, broken timestamps, and whispers between veterans who pause mid-sentence. And there, tucked inside a mission log mislabeled training exercise, he found it. Takhar Province, 2005. Unit, Ghost Recon, 017, all-female sniper division. Mission, high-value extractions under hostile territory. Status, success, casualties, redacted, Commander, Lieutenant Colonel Evelyn Shaw. The final note sent chills down his spine. Unit disbanded under classified directive. Survivors placed into protective silence. Mission scrubbed from public record. Further reference not advised. But Louis didn't stop. He compiled what he could. Footage, fragments, scanned signatures, thermal recon overlays, ricochet patterns, even psychological reports. What he built wasn't just a case. It was a proof of existency, not just that Evelyn Shaw had lived, but that she had shaped an entire era of warfare from the shadows. And yet, she had disappeared willingly. Until now. A week later, Evelyn returned. This time, no one laughed. No one questioned her presence. She wasn't escorted off the property or handed a weapon as a joke. A chair had been set aside for her, a sealed water bottle. Her spot on the bench bore her name, Lieutenant Colonel Shaw, Ret, carved into the wood with respect. But she said nothing. She just watched. Recruits fired off rounds downrange, adjusting for wind. Evelyn would lean forward occasionally and say a few words to whoever stood beside her. Breathe through your exhale. Don't pull press. Feel the rifle, don't fight it. Simple phrases, barely whispered, but somehow they changed everything. Marks improved. Misses became hits. One instructor quietly told the commanding officer, "She just corrected what we couldn't in 2 months without raising her voice." Word of her presence reached further than the base. That week, a representative from Command HQ flew Inno insignia. No press coverage, just a plainclothes officer with a briefcase full of paperwork and a hopeful expression. He asked Evelyn to take up an official position, head of advanced marksmanship programs. She declined. "I've done my part," she said gently. "It's time for others to write the next chapter." But she didn't leave either. Every week, she came back, not to be in charge, but to observe, assist, and disappear just as quietly. Her influence, though, was impossible to ignore. 3 months after her return, Sandridge's top marksman qualification rate increased by 40%. 6 months in, soldiers trained under her quiet instruction were outperforming snipers from other bases in live simulations. By the end of the year, instructors across multiple units had begun teaching ricochet technique strategies once deemed mythical as part of the official curriculum. And yet, Evelyn's name never appeared in the manuals. Not because they didn't want to include her. but because she asked them not to. "Don't write about me," she told Louis one day, handing him back a draft of an article he was preparing for the Training Academy newsletter. "Just teach what matters." He looked at her, frustrated. "Ma'am, you deserve credit. You rewrote the rules." She shook her head, her voice steady. "Rules can be copied. Lessons must be lived. If they remember my name, they'll forget the lesson." Louis didn't fully understand then. But he would. The next week, she didn't come. The week after, neither. Then, on a Wednesday morning, the recruits found a folded piece of paper taped gently to the stone bench behind target number 3. The paper was old, yellowed slightly by the sun. The handwriting, neat but faint hands that once steadied a rifle, now trembling just enough. It read, "Don't aim to hit the target. If you don't know why you're pulling the trigger, Ghost Recon." No one touched it. They just stood there, reading it over and over again. The commanding officer, in a rare moment of silence, declared that the range would be officially renamed the Reyes Shaw 017 Complex, a place for ghosts who taught in silence, and for legends who asked not to be remembered but never could be forgotten. Weeks passed. The shooting range felt different now, quieter but not from silence. It was a reverent quiet, the kind that settles in when you walk into a room where something sacred happened. Recruits still came and went. Rifles still cracked through the desert wind. But now, before every training session, someone without needing to be asked would walk over to target number 3 and brush off the dust from the stone bench. They never sat on it. They just nodded once, like it was a form of salute. The paper Evelyn had left was laminated, framed, and bolted into a plaque by the range's chief engineer. Below her handwritten line was a quote in metal script. "True mastery doesn't demand attention, it leaves behind impact." The name Ghost Recon didn't mean myth anymore. It meant standard. At bases across the country, instructors began to revise their teaching protocols. Ricochet theory, once dismissed as fantasy, was now examined with scientific seriousness. Breath, discipline, recoil anticipation, wind mapping without tech-all things Evelyn had demonstrated without ever once needing PowerPoint slides. Yet, still very few ever knew her name. And that was exactly how she would have wanted it. Louis, however, couldn't let her legacy fade into anonymity, not entirely. He compiled what he could her teachings, her advice, even her silences, and created a field manual titled Marksman Mindset, What Ghost Recon Taught Without Saying. It became an underground staple, never officially published, just passed quietly from unit to unit, from veteran to recruit. Every time it changed hands, someone would say, "She didn't teach us how to shoot, she taught us why we shoot." One rainy afternoon, Louis found himself speaking at a leadership seminar. By then, he'd become a decorated instructor himself. Room full of officers, projector humming. People ready to hear stories of precision, tactics, results. But he told them a different story. He told them about Evelyn Shaw. He didn't mention the impossible shot first, or the mission in Afghanistan, or the Ghost Recon unit. He started with a woman who walked onto a range and got laughed at. He ended with a range that now bore her name. And then he said, she never raised her voice, but the entire base changed after she spoke. Silence. Then slow, steady applause. Not thunderous, just enough to match her legacy. Back at Sandridge, change took root in other, quieter ways. The older recruits began mentoring the younger ones without being told. Soldiers stopped mocking the slower learners. Everyone started checking their weapons with more care, more respect. Not just for the tool, but for the responsibility that came with it. Because Evelyn had made one thing perfectly clear. It wasn't about the bullet. It was about the reason behind it. One morning, an instructor noticed something strange. On the stone bench beneath the framed quote, there was a single brass casing, polished, undisturbed, no note. No one claimed it. But they all knew. It was hers. A final whisper, a signature in metal. That week, the base chaplain requested a quiet service, a funeral, just a remembrance. No flag folding, no rifles fired, just stories. A room full of men and women who'd once doubted her, now telling stories about the woman who changed everything without needing to say much at all. Some spoke about her technique, others about her silence, but one recruit barely 19 stood up and said the simplest thing, She made me want to deserve the rifle in my hands. After that, no one said another word. Because what else could they say? Outside, a gust of desert wind blew through the range. It carried dust, yes, but also something heavier: respect. Later that year, a small team of veterans created a scholarship in her honor for young women in marksmanship programs who showed unusual focus. Not speed, not strength, just focus. They called it the Shaw Standard. And the strange thing was no one ever asked why it wasn't bigger, why there were no headlines, no interviews, no Hollywood biopic. Because everyone who knew the story already understood. Greatness doesn't crave the spotlight. It sharpens in silence. Then it walks away so others can rise. And so Evelyn Shawghost Recon, 17, became more than a name. She became a benchmark. A quiet presence that lived in every impossible shot, every careful breath, every recruit who learned that the loudest person in the room is rarely the strongest. Louis once said it best. She wasn't just a legend. She was the reason I believe legends can be real. So the next time you see someone walk into a room and get underestimated, pause. Look closer. They might not speak much. They might not stand tall. They might not ask for anything. But that doesn't mean they haven't already carried something bigger than you'll ever know. And when your moment comes not to fire, but to choose whether to fire, remember her final lesson. Don't aim to hit the target if you don't know why you're pulling the trigger. Because the best shots are the ones you never have to take.